First-person shooters are some of the most popular video games nowadays. In fact, you could even say the market is oversaturated with them. Every year there are dozens of military shooters, sci-fi shooters, and multiplayer online shooter games, to the point where the first-person shooter has mostly grown stale. However, believe it or not, there was a time when a first-person shooter was not even a thing. All the games were platformers, beat-em-ups, or RPGs, with the exception of the occasional game which tried to break the mold. In the early 90s, games like Street Fighter and Star Fox were releasing, so it's easy to see how when Doom released in December of 1993, it made a mark on the gaming industry, with its extreme violence, satanic imagery, and more importantly, its fluid movement, fantastic level design, and addictive combat loop. It was a massive hit and is often seen as one of the greatest video games of all time, and certainly one of the most influential games in the industry. So in this video, I'm going to analyze every single aspect of the game in extreme detail, but first we need to go back to before Doom and have a look at the state of the gaming industry back then. So first of all, we need to go back to 1973, a full 20 years before the release of Doom, which is when the first ever first-person shooter was created, Maze. And the similarities to Doom are apparent straight away. Maze was a multiplayer shooter where up to 8 players are all in a maze together and they need to shoot enemies to score points, and the person with the most points ultimately wins. This game is the first ever example of a first-person shooter, as well as the first 3D first-person shooter and the first multiplayer first-person shooter. Now, another video game, however, was also being developed around this time called Spazim, which is a 32-player first-person shooter flight simulation game which also featured aspects of resource management. This game was released in March of 1974, before a large gap with no real major breakthroughs until 1980, when Battlezone was released. Now, Battlezone, you'd say, was the first successful major first-person shooter, which was developed by Atari and released exclusively to arcades initially, before home computers received a port in 1983. It's a tank shooter game, with the player controlling a tank and shooting enemy tanks to earn points. This game is often seen as the first successful 3D game as well, and it was a major success, with over 15,000 arcade cabinets being sold. Way Out was a first-person maze game released in 1982, which was developed by Serious Software, and this is where we can see major steps forward. This game allowed the player full 360-degree movement in a first-person perspective, and also had a map feature, similar to the auto map which Doom would eventually utilize over a decade later. A map which draws itself as the player explores more of the environment. This is a massive step forward, and Way Out is a game which it's clear its software eventually drew influence from. However, after Way Out came MIDI Maze, developed by Xanth Software, which takes the foundation that was set by Serious Software and builds upon it to allow multiple players inside these mazes and gives them guns to be able to fight each other to the death. This game is seen as the first true deathmatch experience and was fundamental to the progression of the first-person shooter genre. After this, we see the first title that was created by id Software, Hover Tank 3D, released in April of 1991. Many people think Wolfenstein 3D is when id Software came into the picture, but they tried their hand before then, and Hover Tank 3D has many similarities to Doom, even down to some of the enemy design. In Hover Tank, the player must navigate through multiple levels, fighting mutated humans and enemy hover tanks, and also rescuing humans before a nuke explodes. This game was built using an engine that was designed by John Carmack, which was then modified and expanded upon to create Catacomb 3D. Catacomb 3D then was released in November of 1991 and was the first game like this to use texture mapping, which is a system which allows 2D images to be mapped and placed onto a 3D object or wrapped around one. Additionally, this is the first game like this to feature the player character's hands on the screen holding the weapon used as well. However, this title was criticised for using an enhanced graphics adapter, which limited the quality of the graphics, as this technology had become outdated in 1987 when the video graphics array was released, which allowed better visual fidelity. id Software's subsequent game, Wolfenstein 3D, utilised that video graphics array instead to allow better graphical quality. So the aforementioned Wolfenstein 3D was released on May the 5th, 1992, and to be honest, I could easily be doing a massive several hour long critical analysis of Wolfenstein 3D instead of Doom, but today we're talking about Doom, so instead I'll be concise. Wolfenstein was a massive step forward for first person shooters. Each level is set on one floor, and the player has to traverse a maze-like environment whilst collecting new weaponry and finding secrets on the way through hidden doors. The gameplay of Wolfenstein was a natural progression of first-person shooters and was a huge stepping stone forwards towards what we're going to see in Doom. And now it's time to discuss that game's development in full detail. There isn't really much to say about the development of Doom that hasn't already been said 1,000 times, so I'm going to go into detail, but I'm still going to try and keep this section concise. Doom began full development in September of 1992 after the release of the sequel to Wolfenstein 3D titled Spear of Destiny. Lead programmer John Carmack started designing an even more advanced engine than would have been used for Wolfenstein, but it wasn't necessarily made with Doom in mind. In fact, the engine was first used by Raven Software for their game Shadowcaster, which was released months before Doom. Now, allegedly, the game was originally supposed to be based on the Aliens license. However, John Romero remembers this a bit differently. A lot of reports say that it was originally based on the Aliens license for quite a substantial part of development, but John Romero says that they'd only ever really been considering the game being based on the Aliens license for all of 30 minutes, as they quickly rejected the offer because they instead imagined doing something that had a little bit of sci-fi in there, but also had heavy influence from Evil Dead and Dungeons & Dragons.
Groovy.
Now, whilst all this was happening, Tom Hall began work on the Doom Bible because he imagined Doom being a sprawling, story-driven title starting on a planet called Tatenga. And the plot involved going to hell and back, and there would have been 5 playable characters: Loriby Chen, John Petro Pietrovich, Dmitry Paramo, Thea Barrett, and Buddy Dacote. Now, I'm probably completely butchered the pronunciation of those names, but that's generally the idea. Now, there was obviously a lot more in the Bible itself. However, to summarise, John Carmack disapproved, saying that story in games was like story in porn movies. Everyone expects it to be there, but no one really cares about it. Tom Hall obviously didn't take this very well because prior to this, he'd also wanted to continue making the Commander Keen series of games, so he didn't even want to make Doom, and now the work he'd done putting together a narrative for Doom was also being scrapped, so understandably, he wasn't really very happy. Once the game had started active production, John Carmack did the majority of the background coding to make sure the game and engine were running smoothly, and John Romero helped out with flickering lights, doors, rising stairs and crushing ceilings, as well as adding the ability to save and load the game. Whilst he wasn't doing this, he was programming the maps for the first episode. Tom Hall began working on the maps for episode 2 and 3, however, the others felt like his maps weren't really enjoyable enough to play. They looked more like regular buildings as opposed to entertaining play spaces to slay demons in. Additionally, Tom Hall wanted to add teleporters into the game, which was not something that John Romero wanted. However, Tom Hall fought hard for this feature to be brought into the game, and so it did end up working its way in. Tom Hall also felt like there were too many enemies on the ground, so he also fought for the inclusion of airborne enemies such as the Lost Souls and the Cacodemon. Now, a lot of these small things and these small conflicts, they were building up for Tom Hall, and especially after his Doom Bible was rejected and the fact he was working on a game he didn't even want to work on, he really wasn't having a good time at id Software, and so he decided to leave. It's clear that the separation was handled smoothly though, because John Romero and Tom Hall ended up working together multiple times again in the future, and him leaving the company didn't have much of an effect on the speed of the game's development. This was primarily due to the addition of Sandy Peterson to the id Software team. Sandy was hired about 10 weeks before release, and in those 10 weeks, Peterson completed all of the second and third episodes and one level for the first episode. That's an incredible 19 levels in total, and when the team play tested the maps, they all said that Sandy's levels were just as fun to play as John Romero's, and so Doom was released on December the 10th, 1993, after all of these levels were play tested and completed. The game was a massive success, obviously, and is now seen as being one of the greatest video games ever created, and one of the most influential in the industry as well. It was the first multiplayer shooter game that reached any real sort of popularity, and businesses in the 90s had to make rules to stop employees hosting Doom multiplayer matches during their lunch breaks, because they were clogging up the computer networks with traffic. The game was also massively controversial because of its violence and satanic imagery at the time. People said the game was a way of simulating extremely realistic killing. Christian organizations said the game was diabolical, despite the fact that in the game you're literally killing the demons of hell and stopping those demons from taking over. But what happens when a game is controversial and people keep talking about it and they keep trying to ban it? Obviously, it makes it even more popular. They say that no publicity is really bad publicity, don't they? So then, let's examine this satanic murder-influencing title from 1993. Is it really one of the greatest video games ever created, or is it just an overrated, overhyped mess? Let's take a look. So in this section, I'm going to go over the weaponry and enemies featured in Doom, as well as their place in the main combat loop, because that's the main thing you'll be engaging with when playing Doom, as Doom is very much about shooting and killing bad guys and having a hell of a good time while you do it, whilst occasionally picking up the odd keycard to unlock a coloured door every now and again, and also occasionally walking into a wall and realising it's actually a secret door with cool hidden stuff in it. That's generally the main thing you'll be doing when you play Doom. Anyway, so first we have the weaponry. The first item, or the first weapon, is your fists. They're an extremely basic close-range weapon. Obviously, because they're your fists, you can't run out of ammo, but they're about as powerful as a pistol shot, except you have to be right in the demon's face to punch them, which means you're really easy to be exposed to their attacks. We also have the chainsaw, which does damage like the normal fist, but this time it's 4 times faster, which means that obviously you're doing more damage right up close to enemies. Next we have the pistol, which is your default long-range weapon. It's almost entirely useless though against anything stronger than a zombie man or a shotgun guy, so after you get later weapons there's not really much of a point in using it. The shotgun is a good general purpose weapon capable of dealing medium to high damage, especially at close range. It's going to be your main tool for mass destruction in this game. You also have the chain gun, which is the weapon that essentially replaces the pistol. It's very good against large crowds of small monsters or single large monsters, but its rapid rate of fire can also quickly deplete its ammo supply. You have the rocket launcher as well, which obviously fires explosive rockets. It does loads of damage, but can also seriously hurt you if you use it too close to you because of the splash damage. The plasma gun is the other weapon in the game, which shoots pulses of blue hot plasma at incredibly high speed, and it can take down groups of incoming enemies easily if it's aimed properly. In my opinion, I've always compared this mostly to the chain gun because it's very similar, except it uses a different kind of ammo. The BFG 9000 is also known as the Big Fucking Gun. It kills almost any monster in one shot. It's definitely going to be the main tool which you're going to want to rely on in any kind of close situation when you think you're not necessarily going to be able to handle the enemies that are in front of you. Now, as you can see there, each of those weapons effectively has a purpose. At each moment in Doom, there's an ideal weapon that you should be using to deal with the scenario you're faced with. Sometimes the shotgun is the ideal weapon, sometimes the chain gun is ideal, and then sometimes the plasma gun is ideal. This is that satisfying and engaging combat loop that I mentioned, and the different enemy types sometimes call for different weapons to be used to best deal with them. So, the enemy types we have are, number 1, we have the zombie man, who is a former soldier who is now a demonically possessed zombie armed with a rifle. He's the weakest of the enemies in Doom, and so he's pretty easy to kill. We have the shotgun guy, who is a former sergeant ranked soldier who is now a demonically possessed zombie, but this time he's armed with a shotgun, which makes him different to the zombie man. They're more dangerous and they're more skilled than their zombie man counterparts. We have the Imp, which is a brown, sort of human-sized humanoid demon that hurls fireballs from a distance and claws nearby opponents. They're the most frequently encountered monsters in the game because they're featured the most throughout all 3 of the main regular episodes. We have the Pinky Demon, which is a large humanoid bipedal demon with a large mouth armed with sharp teeth. It can only really attack you at close range, so as long as you can outrun it, you'll generally be alright, and you'll generally keep it at a bit of a distance, you'll be able to defeat it pretty easily. The Spectre is exactly the same as the Pinky Demon, except this one is invisible. We have the Lost Soul, which is a floating, flaming skull which rushes quickly to try and bite you. They can be quite annoying if you're not very accurate, but they're generally pretty easy to take care of. The Cacodemon is the last of the regular enemies in the game, which is a large, red, floating, spherical monster with horns, one single eye, and it's got a really weird, creepy smile. It moves pretty slowly, but it has strong jaws and spits out lightning balls from a distance. So those are the main enemies that are featured in the game, and as I previously mentioned, each one has a specific weapon type, which is probably going to be the best at taking it down, depending on the distance. However, when there's groups of mixed enemies, that's when the decision making comes into play, and you need to try and figure out how best to handle that situation. Now, in addition to all of these basic enemies, we also have the 3 different bosses that are featured in Doom. We have, first of all, the Baron of Hell. 2 of these monsters act as the boss in Kneedeep in the Dead, resembling large, blood-red satyrs. It can hurl streaming balls of green plasma and has a powerful clawing attack at close range. They take a large amount of damage before they eventually are defeated. The Cyber Demon is a massive cybernetic minotaur looking guy, and he's the boss in the Shores of Hell. It'll fire a volley of 3 explosive rockets from the rocket launcher which he has on his left arm, and he moves at a pretty decent speed for his size. He can easily lay waste to even the best player in the game because of his insane amount of damage that he does with his weapons and how somehow he always manages to be incredibly accurate with that thing, even though it's not a hit scan, which is pretty annoying. The Spider Mastermind next, and he's the cybernetic boss which awaits in Inferno and Thy Flesh Consumed, as well as the Sigil bonus 5th episode, which we'll be talking about later. It's basically a massive brain with eyes, mouth, and some small metal arms, which is like a metal chassis which has been put on top of. It's really weird, basically, but it's got a really powerful chain gun which completely lays waste to anything in front of it if you're not being very careful. Now, I contemplated mentioning all of these bosses when we talk about the specific levels where they first show up, but all of these bosses appear again after you defeated them the first time, so they almost become regular enemies in a way. I feel like the Baron of Hell is probably the best example of this because they show up in great numbers in later levels, and they're basically a regular enemy, just as they just have a dramatic first introduction. The Cyber Demon also has similar treatment, but they don't really show up quite as frequently, and the Spider Mastermind only shows up again once in episode 4 and once in episode 5. Anyway, so I think we've generally covered all of the bases now, so it's time to truly begin. Now we're going to go through every single level of every single episode of Doom and discuss what makes them work or what makes them not work so well. There'll also be quite a few bonuses along the way, so get yourself a snack and a drink, relax, and let's start with episode 1, Kneedeep in the Dead. The first map of Kneedeep in the Dead is perhaps one of the most iconic first-person shooter levels ever created. Designed by John Romero, this map has fantastic level design and a simple U-shaped layout which makes traversing it at speed an absolute blast. There are 3 secret areas here to find, and one of them is not very noticeable at all, but it introduces the concept of invisible walls to the player, as well as lifts that raise and lower on a timer, which is something they'll need to be on the lookout for in future maps, as more challenging levels are definitely yet to come. And the extra resources you find in these sections can be absolutely crucial. This map features the pistol and allows the player to access a shotgun by finding a secret area, as well as a set of mega armor. Both of these items put you at a pretty big advantage going into the next map, and it's always recommended to pick up these on your run through Kneedeep in the Dead. One of the most notable things about this map is that it allows the player to get outside. When you first play through Hangar, you see areas outside of a window, and at first you naturally think that it's outside the play space, and you're going to be staying inside this facility. However, when you notice the secret mega armor outside, you realise you can get out there, and you spend ages trying to figure out how to get there. And this is really fantastic design, and it's just generally a really cool feature, because it feels like you're essentially going outside of the map effectively when you go out there, which is just awesome. Hangar is one of the best levels in Doom, and it's one of the best levels in a first-person shooter game, period, and it really shows you what Doom is all about. The second map in this episode is Nuclear Plant, which really is a big step up from Hangar in terms of complexity. This level was one of the first maps created for Doom, whereas the first level was ironically the last level created. Nuclear Plant was also created by John Romero and was essentially his testing ground for maps. A lot of the ideas that he later expanded upon on other levels he would originally test on this map. The map opens up with a hub area which connects all the other parts of this level together. Even the secret maze section of this level is still connected to this hub area. Pretty early on, we're also introduced to the concept of keycards, which is one of the trademarks of Doom's levels, as it encourages the player to backtrack through some of the maze-like areas to get to other colour-coded doors, and clever placement of the keycards further encourages exploration, which in turn leads to the player finding more secrets and repeatedly being placed in combat scenarios, which highlights the game's fantastic combat loop. This level also features multiple examples of the game subtly telling the player where to go through environmental cues, lighting changes, and geometry changes. Main items required for the player's progression are always easy to see, such as the red keycard contrasting with the blue floor being placed by multiple enemies at the top of a staircase. Secret areas, however, are instead more subtly hinted at, and whilst the game never ever outright tells the player where secrets are, there's always enough texture inconsistencies to hint at something to someone who's paying attention. For example, the secret door, which houses the switch the player activates to get outside of the map to acquire the minigun, is textured just slightly differently to the other walls. It still blends in very well, but an observant player will notice the texture change and then try and see if there's a secret door here. The secret maze section of this level also highlights the engine's ability to drastically alter the lighting, which massively increases the suspense and tension, and makes this hidden section quite challenging, especially on ultra-violence difficulty. The chainsaw on top of a podium is also an awesome way of introducing this badass weapon to the player. When you start ripping and tearing your way through Pinky Demons, you'll realise why it needed such a grandiose introduction. This weapon is just fun to use, and it's a great way of ploughing through hordes of demons without needing to use ammo on those early levels. I feel like the third level of Doom, Toxic Refinery, is perhaps my personal favourite level from Kneedeep in the Dead. It's got such an awesome and original layout, it's just the right length, and it's got just the right amount of secrets to make it fun going through it again and again. I feel like the introductory section is perhaps a little bit too hard on ultra-violence and nightmare difficulties, just because killing the spectres at the start of this level can be an absolute pain, and you're in for it straight away. You don't even have time to catch your breath and take in your surroundings before you need to chainsaw a Pinky Demon's face off. Heading down the left path then, we meet a few standard enemies before we see a Soul Sphere, a power-up which increases the player's health by 100%, up to a maximum of 200% if the player was already at 100% health. We can't get it, however. It's placed here to show the player that there is a way to get here, however that way is hidden. We can progress through this level normally after this point if we want to, and ignore the Soul Sphere. However, acquiring the Soul Sphere is the first part of several connected hidden areas which result in the player being able to access E1M9, which is the hidden map of the first episode. This is where things get cool, because I always love secret content in games, especially when it's full levels. It's something that really has left video games nowadays, with rare exceptions. In most big AAA games nowadays, publishers would never let developers make content that's not going to be seen by the majority of players, because they want developers to be focused on making the bare minimum so that anything extra is sold to them through microtransactions or DLC, instead of focusing on making a truly fantastic and replayable full package which is filled to the brim with content. If Doom had been published by Activision nowadays, for example, it would have 3 episodes of just 8 maps with no secret areas, and then each additional map would be sold for extra profit. The game probably wouldn't even have the BFG, and that would be sold to the player as DLC weapon, and then Mega Armor and Soul Sphere power-ups would also be brought from the store, and Ultra Violence and Nightmare difficulty would also cost extra money. There's just so many things that are wrong with games nowadays, and it's so frustrating because when you play a game like this that's filled to the brim with so much content, it's just awesome, and it would have been great value for money back in the day. Anyway, accessing the Soul Sphere requires the player to use their ears and listen for the sound of a lift dropping. They then need to run onto this lift, which allows them access to the Soul Sphere. However, when the player's on that lift, they can then also run to a second secret lift, which takes them to another secret area, which allows them to press a button which opens up another secret room, and from inside that secret room, they can access the secret level through a secondary exit switch. But that's not enough. By that exit switch, the player can also open up another secret area, which gives them access to the rocket launcher. The amount of secrets within secrets here is amazing. It's secretception, and I can't get enough of it. Before we move on though, I need to talk about that famous moment when you grab the keycard to take you to the regular exit switch and the lights go out. This moment scared the shit out of most people playing at the time, because you're just getting barraged by fireballs instantly from a bunch of imps behind a secret door that opened up behind you. The creative use of lighting here is fantastic, and it instilled fear into people straight away because you thought you were comfortable, and suddenly you're getting attacked and you can't even see why. It's brilliant. Right then, so let's assume that you didn't go to the secret exit and you instead progressed through the natural progression of the game. You'd end up at the 4th level, Command Control. This was a level originally created by John Hall before being finished by John Romero after his departure from id Software. It opens up in quite a unique way as you're being shot by enemies from above, and you can see these higher up areas, which are all parts of the map you'll be able to end up exploring once you've gone down several of the paths in the level. The interesting thing with this map is that getting through it is quite quick and easy once you know where the keycards are. However, finding those keycards can take you quite a bit of time if you end up going down the wrong path. This level is probably also one of the earliest examples of video games being changed due to controversy, which is something that happens a lot in the world nowadays. There was a structure on this map which was built to deliberately resemble a swastika, as a subtle nod to id Software's previous game, Wolfenstein 3D. It wasn't meant to indicate that Nazis were controlling the demons or anything like that. It wasn't John Romero promoting his secret Nazi party that he's got going on behind the scenes. Nothing like that. It was just a subtle reference to id Software's previous release. However, the symbol had to be removed because people were really upset about it being present in the game. People started thinking id Software was secretly Nazis because they had a swastika in their older Commander Keen game as a reference to the then upcoming Wolfenstein 3D, and then Wolfenstein itself was obviously full of them. And now Doom had one in as well, so people didn't understand that it was just a subtle Easter egg, a small little reference, and sadly it ended up being changed. Personally, I feel like Command Control is probably the weakest map in the first episode. I personally just don't find the maze very fun to navigate through, despite the fact that I can get through it pretty quickly now. And whilst this level does introduce the concept of walking in the slime for extended periods of time to find secrets, which is a pretty cool idea, I don't really feel like this level offers much different from what we've seen already. And I'd say it's the first level that feels to me quite average, really. Now, in 2016, John Romero probably felt the same way that I just did, and he released an alternate version of E1M4 called Phobos Mission Control. This is his vision of what the level would have been like if he had worked on the level back in the day, and it's a very interesting take because you see originally it was created by Tom Hall and then finished off by John Romero, but the level wasn't really massively changed from Tom Hall's original vision. So here we have John Romero's vision for what it would have been if it was all him. Now, it has a similar blueprint to Command Control, however it plays out very differently. At first, you're still greeted with the same textures and there's still soldiers high up shooting down at you, however, that's basically where the similarities end. The level doesn't have that annoying maze to get the yellow keycard, it's now instead a computer room filled with raising platforms and you have to navigate across them whilst watching out for surprise attacks from enemies that come down from lowering platforms. The whole structure of this level is really good. It's built around finding buttons to press which open doors, so you find the A button to open door A, the B button to open door B, but all the while you have loads of doors opening behind you, platforms raising and lowering to reveal secret enemies, and I think really my main issue with this level is just how hard it is when compared to all of the other ones. Now, I played all of the levels on ultra violence difficulty, and this level did not fit in at all. It's just so much harder than every other level in episode 1 on ultra violence difficulty, and it would have stood out like a sore thumb back in the day. It's on par with the difficulty of episode 4, and that's saying something, especially the final showdown at the end of the level when you have 5 spectres, about 20 shotgun hitscan enemies, and like 20 imps all surprise attacking you at once. That part is just so difficult, it took me about 5 attempts on ultra violence, and I hadn't struggled with any of the maps in episode 1, 2 or 3 like that, so unless John Romero went back and adjusted the ultra violence difficulties of all the maps, then this map would have stood out so much if it was the original episode 1 map 4. After that slight detour then, Phobos Lab follows on from Command Control, and this map now returns to that more distinct John Romero episode 1 style straight away, with more open rooms with distinct changes in the verticality and height, with some rooms looking over other ones, later rooms you'll be able to access being visible earlier as hints of where you're going to be going, as well as buildings and rooms that feel more like real places you could actually imagine existing. This level is probably in my top 5 Doom maps, as it's such a joy to navigate throughout this area. From the small path you need to walk along at risk of falling into the slime, to the ambush when you're going down to activate that switch that opens at the final section of the level, to the 3 secret doors back to back which allow you to get outside of the map, as well as the running jump to get the mega armor. There are so many awesome little tricks you can do in this map, and so many amazingly hid secrets that feel amazing to figure out. The level design is just so good here as well. The way some areas connect to others is a joy to figure out, and the level feels like a real environment. From the level geometry to the wall textures being broken up with bits of metal that make it look like a real space, this level is truly an example of Doom at its best, and it's a level I'd highly encourage everyone to go back and play, and if you haven't gotten 100% of the secrets, you definitely want to make sure you do that. It's just so much fun. Next up, it's time to talk about Enemy Bonanza, otherwise known as E1M6, Central Processing, the map with the most enemies in all of Doom and Ultimate Doom, containing a whopping 177 enemies on Ultra Violence and Nightmare difficulties. That's mainly because this map is all about traps and surprising the player with waves and waves of enemies. This is another level designed by John Romero, and it's clear he was experimenting this time with surprising the player and making them feel trapped, as there are multiple instances of the player being surprised by doors opening with multiple enemies on the other side whilst they're trapped in a room. The map has quite a good layout with multiple pathways being visible to the player, but coloured doors being clearly locked so the player knows where to go when they find the corresponding keycard. This level also has an interesting and unique maze section with multiple identical rooms placed next to each other, which makes it easy for the player to get lost in. However, it's actually simple enough that the player shouldn't get frustrated, as there's only so many ways the player can go until they inevitably find their way out. On the whole, this level is fun to navigate, but I don't feel like it's one of the best in this episode. I like the maze and the introductory section when you get the red and blue keys are good, however after that, I feel like some of the rooms aren't quite as enjoyable as some of the other ones we've seen so far, but it's still quite strong. Another John Romero map takes up the 7th spot, however this is probably the first map in the game which I'm just indifferent on from a visual perspective. This is mainly because the computer aesthetic I just don't really find very fun to look at, so the map seems to mainly consist of grey technology textures that I don't think have aged too well. The bridge section with the enemies that drop down from a higher platform is quite a good little mid area, and I find the two building interiors, unfortunately, they look quite bland. The secret way of dropping down from the bridge it's pretty cool, and the small little balcony housing the blue key being visible through a window from one of the other buildings is a nice detail, which is a pretty clever hint if a player may be stuck finding it. So the level isn't really bad, it's designed well, but I just don't really feel like visually this one does it for me. Phobos Anomaly is the final core map of Episode 1, and it's the only one that has no input at all from John Romero. However, this is primarily because it's a boss fight level, and this level is still absolutely iconic. I personally don't feel like the two Barons of Hell you fight are that challenging, but it doesn't mean they don't make an impression. Seeing not one, but two enemies facing you definitely makes you shit yourself the first time you see it. And when playing on Ultra Violence difficulty, there's also 10 spectres here that you need to deal with as well. The thing is, you have absolutely loads of room to work with here though, and I think that's this level's main flaw. Having so much space means the Barons of Hell aren't going to cause you any trouble at all as long as you keep moving, and I can beat the two of them alone hitless pretty much every time. So on Ultra Violence difficulty, the spectres are going to be your main concern, and that's only because you usually struggle to see them. Once the fight's over though, the walls of the arena come down, revealing the way out, which is a teleport to a room which instantly kills you, a fitting end to an amazing episode. Now we need to discuss E1M8B, Tech Gone Bad, because the original E1M8 wasn't spearheaded by John Romero, so therefore he remade this level as well as E1M4 that we talked about earlier in 2016. So E1M8B, Tech Gone Bad, is John Romero's vision of the final level of Episode 1, and this is a very strong level, with an awesome gimmick, and it feels almost like Mount Erebus, a map which we'll be talking about when we get to Episode 3, in that it's outside a lot and you're travelling from one building to another whilst finding secrets out in the slime. The level design is fantastic here, and the way each part of the level is connected with the other parts is awesome. There's some really cool secrets here too, which weave neatly back to earlier parts of the level, or you can get to certain high up enemy spots that you wouldn't initially expect to be able to reach. From a level design perspective, this map is absolutely excellent, and I love the fact this is now a regular level essentially, except for the fact there's two Barons of Hell at the end, which is now more like the final battle of the map before you get to the exit. You have a full level first, and then you have to fight against these Barons of Hell at the end. I like this idea, but unfortunately, this level suffers from two main issues. The first is that, in my opinion, the level is just too long. I love Doom's gameplay and I love running around the environments, but there does reach a point where a level starts to feel like it's dragging to me, and this level unfortunately begins to feel like that. I personally would have preferred it if the level finished after you get the yellow key and go through the little sections there, because the red key area at the end I personally found tedious, and it wasn't really adding anything positive to the overall experience. It just started to feel like the level was wearing thin. Additionally, this level also suffers from the same issue as John Romero's vision of E1M4, where the difficulty is just way too high on Ultra Violence and Nightmare levels. Again, I had absolutely no issue beating all of episodes 1, 2 and 3 of this game on Ultra Violence, so it's not a skill issue for me myself. Now, John Romero said he wanted to create his own version of Map 4 and Map 8 so that he could essentially say that he had his own vision of what Kneedeep in the Dead would be, and I get that, but then how come if these episodes are supposed to seamlessly slide into the map roster of Doom, how come the difficulty is just way off compared to the others? It seems a bit strange to me, but aside from those two minor grievances, this is still an exceptional map, though I would recommend everyone give a try if they haven't already. Now, E1M9 Military Base is the secret map of Episode 1, also designed by John Romero, and it's a pretty short but sweet run through a few rooms which end up all connecting together and then allowing you access to the final exit switch. The level design here is really cool. At first it looks like it's going to be really simple, and this level won't offer you very much. At first, you see that you're greeted with a cage full of imps surrounded by some soldiers, and after slaying them you see that you have 3 separate doors you can go through. So again, it doesn't really look like there's going to be much this level's offering you. One of the rooms opens up quite a bit. You've got a few combat scenarios, and then you get a coloured keycard which opens up another door. And this one also has a few combat scenarios and then gives you another keycard. And then that opens up another door with some more combat scenarios, and then all these rooms connect together before allowing you access to the final door, which allows you to exit the level. Honestly, the map layout here is really small, but it's put together quite well. It's not a massive map, it's not overly complicated, but it's a perfect example of Doom's satisfying combat loop and movement being paired with simple problem solving, which also makes it such a blast to play. Now then, because I'm a completionist, I'm also covering E1M10, Sewers, a level that was originally created in 1994 by David Calvin, who ended up becoming responsible for the Doom 3 port that was created by Vicarious Visions. This map was only ever available on the original Xbox release of Doom in 2004, so not many people really got a chance to play it, but it's been ported to the PC and it's available on many websites, and the map was even patched to fix some bugs by players. Now then, many people, for some reason, they seem to criticise this level, but I think this is because the map was labelled as E1M10 on the Xbox version, which means you're playing this map alongside 9 other John Romero maps, and he's the king of good level design. Sewers to me genuinely feels like a maze, and yes, it can be confusing navigating through these tunnels, but it's faithfully portraying what being in sewers would be like. I don't know if you've ever been down in the sewers. I have. It's really fun. It smells great. So when you're down there, it feels exactly like E1M10. I do feel like the mix of the UAC sections merged with some of the more hellish textures. It's a bit jarring in some places though, but that's a minor complaint in a map that is otherwise good. It's not great, but it's good, and I think the map managed to deliver an experience that feels unique in its own way. It doesn't feel like any other map in the original Doom, and whilst the level design is spotty for sure, this map is definitely nowhere near as bad as people make it out to be. So that concludes the first episode of Doom, Kneedeep in the Dead. I think generally it's a very, very, very strong episode. It's, in my personal opinion, the strongest episode in Doom. It's the only episode that was ever released with the shareware version of Doom when it was originally released, the free version that was put online. This was the only episode that was ever able to be played by people. And I think this is the reason why the game was so beloved and why many people loved it and shared it all around the place, because this episode is so strong. The level design is so fantastic, the combat loop is paired with the amazing exploration and level design so well, you can't help but enjoy this episode when you play it. Even some of the weaker episodes are still really enjoyable to go through and experience. So now we're going to move on to episode 2, The Shores of Hell. The second episode of Doom is called The Shores of Hell, and it was originally spearheaded by Tom Hall, and he'd started work on 5 of the 9 maps in this episode before he left id Software, at which point one of the new members of staff who was hired, named Sandy Peterson, took over and finished off the rest of episode 2. He was also responsible for the majority of maps seen in Doom 2, so the style we see here, as well as in episode 3, is, you'd say, a little bit more reminiscent of what we see in that game. This map opens up very strongly, with strong satanic imagery being present, which makes for some very recognisable moments, and this map plays with the gimmick of teleporters, a mechanic which we haven't really seen much of so far. However, this map has 7 teleporters littered throughout, which often teleport you very far away, and so mastering which teleport takes you where is key to being able to navigate throughout this level efficiently. This is in direct contrast to all of the levels that we've seen so far, which often have intricate level design, which often weaves back in on itself in several places to help you navigate the map at speed. Now, I do personally prefer the latter. However, in this level, as an immediate introduction to the chaos of these demonic forces, I guess it kind of works, but I still think this kind of level design will be better suited in a map taking place in Hell itself, which is a concept that we do end up seeing later. But even then, I can't really get away from how it just feels like we've got several rooms that have been haphazardly slapped together with teleporters, which is effectively what this level is. Despite my criticisms though, the introduction of the Cacodemon here is welcome, and it's introduced in a strong way, where it's around a corner so you get to hear it first before it's suddenly shooting at you, and you have to fight it quickly whilst you're panicking. E2M2 Containment Area is another map that was started by Tom Hall and finished off by Sandy Peterson. However, this is one which gets a lot of criticism by players, as well as Tom Hall himself, who was not happy with the edits made to the level after he left the project. This map opens up in a warehouse environment filled with crates and boxes, and this section was designed to be a maze. However, some shortcuts were added to it by Sandy Peterson, and a large shortcut was added through use of a secret, which Tom Hall was really not happy with. He's commented that the original version of E2M2 is his personal favourite Doom level. Well, obviously, we will never know exactly what Tom Hall's original vision for the map was, but many people do consider this map to be one of the weakest Doom levels, so maybe the original vision was actually better. But what we've got now is still not good. I'm a fan of some of the more open sections of this map, as well as the lack of any formerly human enemies. I feel like it's nice to get a break from some of the enemy types occasionally, so you don't get too bored of them, but this map is just not good, and I really dislike the vertical crushing walls which you have to sprint past, and I feel like they're just not designed very well. I'm strongly of the belief that anything in Doom which takes away your ability to move quickly is a negative, because one of the strongest aspects of Doom is the speed in which you can move and the speed in which you can fire your weapons and unleash general carnage. So whenever that is hindered, I just think it's a negative to the overall experience, and this level has lots of things, to be honest, which I find to just be annoyances. Refinery, I think, is probably the best map we've seen so far in episode 2, and the unique vines on the walls of the structure and the very high ceilings make for a nice visual change from what we've seen so far. I like the fact that there are two Cacodemons right away in a cage, because it's presenting you with a different kind of challenge than you've seen so far, really, and it adds a bit of depth to the location that you're in. Of all of the Peterson and Hall maps we've seen so far, this is in my opinion the best because it has better level design. When you spawn in, you're actually very close to the exit, but you just don't know it yet. And you have to navigate all around the map to end up getting to it, which means you've made a nice loop, and then once you know where you are, you can go and explore and find some secrets before you go and press the exit switch to finish off the level. Anyway, whilst I did praise some of the textures we saw earlier, I do need to criticise some other textures now. Well, not the textures themselves, but the use of them. There's one specific instance on this level where you're going through this slime and the colour contrast is so jarring and ugly. It really doesn't make the game look good at all. You have these brown intestines on the floor, bright pink flesh to your left, green slime in front of you, grey walls, and a bright red ceiling. The contrast is just absolutely terrible, and it really does not look good at all. Now we've reached E2M4 Deimos Lab, a map that I'm quite interested to talk about because I have very mixed feelings on this map overall. It's another map that was worked on by Tom Hall before being passed to Sandy Peterson, and it's the first map that I feel blends nightmarish demonic imagery with the UAC imagery in a very successful way that makes it feel distinct from episode 1, whilst also maintaining some of the same textures that we saw used there. First of all, the introductory room that is separated off from the rest of the map is stupid. It's just plain stupid. It makes no sense, and it just wastes seconds on every playthrough of the level. Yes, there's that secret shotgun to the right, but it could have easily been hidden in the level proper. I'd also argue that the room afterwards is kind of pointless too, and so is the extra room that you take the lift to go up to. These few introductory rooms feel needless, like they were just there to make the level feel bigger, even though none of them really add anything to the level. The level starts really when you first reach the slime, and now this section here, I like all of this. All of the secrets in the slime, and then when you go up and encounter the Baron of Hell, you go up on the lift, fight the Cacodemon, and then drop back down after you get the auto map. That whole section is fantastic. Even the little room where you go into the room and then you got to go and press the button to get back out, that room is also fantastic, but it's everything after that I have a problem with. When we start getting into the more hellish territory with the iconic faces on the wall, that's where I feel like this level just loses its way and doesn't know what to do. It feels like things were just thrown together randomly with no real sense. There's a staircase where you need to press buttons to activate every single section of the staircase. Why? What's the point in this other than just slowing the player down and making things take longer? Why not just have the stairs raised already? And at the end of the level, you have a room that's filled with blood. You need to run across the room to a small platform you can barely see and press a hidden button to raise the platform to the exit. But again, why? The switch is deliberately hidden in a place where the player won't be able to see it, which causes needless frustration whilst the player is trying to find it, because you wouldn't think the switch would be there. If this was in a John Romero level, the switch would be somewhere that was obvious to see, because he always had it so things on the critical path through the level are obvious, but it's the secret things which are hidden. This here completely is a counter to that, and I don't like it. This level, in my opinion, is all over the place, and the level design is good in that middle section with the slime and the Baron of Hell and the Cacodemon, but then the beginning and end sections feel so messy, and they weren't put together with any real thought or care. Sadly, just like E2M2, they feel like locations patched together, which is a big step down from what has come before. Now we have the first map, which is designed solely by Sandy Petersen, and that is Command Center, arguably one of the hardest maps in the base game. This map features 4 Barons of Hell and 26 Pinky Demons on Ultra Violence and Nightmare difficulties, and because of how tight and close quarters some of these sections are, it can make for a real challenge. Luckily though, this map has no keys, and all the different rooms have a different texture, which means it's pretty easy to figure out where you are. It's just finding the best route to the exit that's the problem. However, this map has 2 exit switches because this map leads on to the secret map, which we'll talk about later. Personally, I think this map is okay. It's not amazing and it's not terrible, it's just pretty standard demon slaying stuff all around. However, that's part of why I feel a lot of episode 2 is generally pretty forgettable. Most of the maps are just okay, and after the superb level design we saw in episode 1, it's a noticeable step down. Now, I don't want to spend this entire video sucking John Romero's dick, but when you have levels like E1M1, E1M2, and E1M5, this level just doesn't even hold a candle to it, and it's quite disappointing really. Next we have the map which disregards everything I just said, because E2M6 Halls of the Damned shows that Sandy Petersen can make good Doom levels. He just had a bit of a rough start, because Halls of the Damned, in my opinion, is excellent. It's massive, sprawling and non-linear, and it really brings out the best of Doom. Maze-like corridors, we need to go and find
not 1, not 2, but 3
keycards, because every single keycard is needed to open the path to the exit. This map also features a fake exit switch where you think you've beaten the level, but in fact you're just about to get bombarded by enemies from all directions. The atmosphere of Doom is on full display here as well. It's dark and creepy, but the fun of the combat keeps you pushing forward even when you feel truly lost. There's loads of variations in the height though, so you don't feel like you're just completely going through the same boring environment the entire time. There's loads of mirable environments and structures built, and the opening area alone makes a fantastic first impression. Halls of the Damned is by far the best map in episode 2, and it also makes me feel like Sandy Petersen was putting most of his effort into this map, which is why E2M2 and E2M4 ended up so messy. But sadly, E2M7 Spawning Vats is just another disappointment. However, this time it was created by Sandy Petersen and Tom Hall. Now, I like the concept on paper, and it definitely has some unique visuals. It's also the largest level in the base game, but size isn't everything. Well, in this regard anyway. Now, like I said, I like the concept on paper. It's supposed to be essentially an amalgamation of all of the previous man-made complexes that we have seen so far throughout episode 2. So it contains aspects of some previous levels combined with some original new ideas. Okay, that's pretty cool. It's like the best of episode 2. I like the idea. The level, though, not so much. There's some sections like the bright blue hallways with the little trench which damages you that I like, and the section leading up to and including the yellow keycard is quite good with lots of elevation changes and some pretty good room design which makes the environments feel like real places a bit more. But overall, the level is just poor. It goes on for way too long, and a lot of the rooms just don't make sense being placed together, and some of the rooms are just boring. Like there's a room with just loads of boxes in filled with pinky demons. It just feels like someone literally on a level editor plopped loads of boxes in a room and then plopped loads of pinky demons in the room. There's moments of greatness here and then moments where the level is just bad and boring, and it's a shame because this level I do genuinely feel has a lot of potential. Now then, another boss fight concludes the second episode, and this time it's a showdown with the Cyber Demon, also designed by Sandy Peterson. The fight opens very well by showing you loads of dead Barons of Hell that have been pinned to the walls. This is a great opening because 2 Barons of Hell were the bosses at the end of episode 1, so whatever you're about to fight here has not 2 but 4 Barons of Hell pinned to its entrance. If that doesn't make you think shit's about to get real, then I don't know what does. But sadly, that's about the most scared you're going to be because the boss fight's just a walk in the park. The Cyber Demon shoots rockets at you, but by now, you're so used to dodging the Imp's projectiles, the Kaka Demon's projectiles, this means nothing to you. Just shoot him with rockets and you'll be set. In ultraviolence and nightmare difficulties, the Lost Souls probably pose more of a threat than the Cyber Demon himself, because dodging the rockets means you might accidentally bump into one, and it's a shame when the extra enemies are more dangerous than the main boss itself. E2M9 Fortress of Mystery is essentially a test level created by Sandy Peterson, and I think it's really best to leave it at that. This level apparently was built to test monster infighting, which is when the enemies will start fighting amongst themselves, and the best strategy here is just to leave the enemies to their own devices so that they kill most of each other, and then you go and finish off whatever's left. If you do want to kill all these enemies yourself though, then it's best to come into this level with quite a bit of leftover ammo from previous levels, and also use the additional ammo which is left at each part of the star-shaped room you're in. Like I said though, there's no point criticizing this level, despite how disappointing it may be, because it was simply a test level that was added on to episode 2 as a bonus secret level, and to be honest, it is still fun in its own way. So then, episode 3, Inferno, opens up with what to me is almost like a little recreation of Hangar, except in Hell and by Sandy Peterson. And that is E3M1, Hellkeep. It's mostly similar to the game's opening level, yet the main path is generally very simple and straightforward, and you're just fighting a few very basic enemies on the way, except with a couple of Pinky Demons and Kaka Demons on the way. But they are very easy to take down at this point in the game. Now this map gets quite a bit of criticism because of how easy and underwhelming it is as an introduction to Hell, but to me, all of the 3 episodes of Doom start off with easy maps and then gradually build up the difficulty. Even John Romero does that in his added episode 5, Sigil, which is the hardest episode of Doom. It still starts off a bit easier and then builds up the challenge. Personally, I think Hellkeep is a solid map, and its scenery and music alone makes its map feel like you've entered somewhere you shouldn't have with its foreboding atmosphere. Now it's time to discuss the hand map that Sandy Peterson created, otherwise known as E3M2, Slough of Despair, a map that's quite literally built to be the shape of a human hand, except one finger, as John Romero says, has a bugger stuck to the end of it. Ah, John, your humour is truly classy. This map always confused me on my first playthrough, but once you've got a good layout in your head of where the main interest points are located on the map, and you know that the map layout is that of a human hand, it's hard to ever get lost for very long after that point. This map also takes place outside, and it's located in a sort of gulch in the ground, and the fingers that come off of it are caves. So the majority of the time here we are outdoors, which is a nice change of pace from the maps that we've seen prior. I would still say that whilst this map does mostly consist of very similar looking colours and textures which can get boring after a while, the map's unique setting and layout make it an enjoyable experience. I wouldn't necessarily say this map excels in the level design area, as once you know where the blue key is, completing this level isn't very hard at all and can be done very quickly, but the unique design means playing it is a nice change of pace from what we've seen previously, and so it's a welcome addition to the map roster. Now we reach the first map in episode 3 that was created by both Sandy Petersen as well as Tom Hall, and that is E3M3, Pandemonium. This was originally supposed to be a high-tech lab in the early Tom Hall versions, before being redesigned as a hell map, presumably after Tom Hall exited the project and Sandy Petersen had to continue on with his work. Pandemonium is for me the Halls of the Damned of episode 3. Not that it has any real similarities, but because it has a fantastic layout, loads of awesome secrets, paths that connect seamlessly together, and is honestly just insanely fun to navigate. The contrast of the more technological looking brown walls with the fire of lava and the red hellish textures is a nice blend, and the constant variations of height really make this level feel dynamic and almost like a Quake level in many places. The introduction of the BFG 9000 is yet another highlight of this level, and we finally acquire a weapon that deals such insane amounts of damage. It just increases the fun of the gameplay exponentially, and this level was the first appearance of that now iconic video game weapon. This is a level that shows Sandy Petersen can make something awesome and amazing, and it does baffle me when we get amazing gems like this, as well as such terrible levels like E2M7 and E2M4. The massive gaps in quality are staggering, and it does make me feel like time constraints might have had an adverse effect on the quality of some of Sandy's maps, but Pandemonium is in my top 5 levels in the entire game probably. It's just the right length, has a good variety of enemies and environments, and is a joy to play through every time. The fourth episode of episode 3 is titled House of Pain, another Petersen level, and this one is not bad, but I personally would have liked to have seen more of the kind of environment we see at the beginning of this level. Then we have rivers of blood and narrow walkways, but there's only a couple of rooms of that before we get into what seems like bog standard Doom environments with the same ceiling height and a maze of similar looking textures and environments in what I assume is the main house of the House of Pain. Here we have just loads of Cacodemons, Pinky Demons, Spectres and Shotgun guys, and they all combine to make this level just not as good as it could have been. The level opens up very well with some entertaining sections, interesting environments and lots of elevation changes, but the problem is, once that part's over, the level just falters massively. The Unholy Cathedral is the 5th map of the 3rd episode, also made by Petersen, and this is similar to the first map of the 2nd episode in that it makes heavy use of teleporters to try and confuse the player and make the maze of the episode even more confusing, which is a concept I am very strongly against. To me, the best Doom level feels like a maze at first, but then through exploration and finding keys, it begins to make sense. And by the end of the level, you find out that the path to the exit switch is actually a lot more simple than you originally realised. The thing is, a cathedral has so much potential as a level, both visually and from a gameplay perspective, and contrasting the holy imagery of a cathedral with a hellish landscape could have been amazing. But to me, this level never feels like a cathedral at all. No part of this level screams cathedral in any way, aside from a repeated use of an upside down cross. But that's not the defining factor of a cathedral, is it? There's loads of things that could have been done with a cathedral environment. You could have started off on the lower sections, have the benches on the left and the right, go up towards a bell tower. You could have gone down to the crypt sections. Maybe that's where you started. You start in the crypt and then work your way up. There's loads of things that could have been done with that kind of idea, but this level does not do any of them, and it's quite disappointing to me. The 6th map in the 3rd episode is called Mount Erebus, and this is the first open level in Doom that feels like it's truly non-linear, allowing for full exploration of a volcanic crater. This crater contains multiple buildings with multiple keys, and finding them all allows you access to the level's exit. This is a completely different level for Doom, and is more of an example of what we will see in Doom 2, with open environments that allow you to explore a bit more freely in an open space. This means the level design is also quite different here, allowing you to go into any building you want at any time, with the end goal of eventually finding all the keycards and piecing together which thing takes you where, and this also allows for loads of secrets to be hidden in interesting ways. Honestly, Mount Erebus is an absolutely phenomenal level, and is one of the highlights of the entire game, and I think it's a brilliant change of pace from the previous maze-like levels we've seen so far to instead go for this approach. Almost feels like a different game, but it works really well, and I'm glad that Doom has the ability to have a level like this work so well, whilst also having levels like E1M1 and E1M5 play out very differently, but still feel awesome to go through. Mount Erebus is one of the absolute classics of the original Doom, and is one of the greatest levels created, and I'm very happy Peterson got to make at least one level in this original Doom that is to me an absolute classic. Mount Erebus also features a secret exit, which takes you to E3M9, the secret map of this episode. This is quite difficult to find actually. There are two ways of getting there. First, you can take the teleporter to a ledge overlooking the water, find the skull switch surrounded by short blue walls, back up to the ledge, and then aim yourself carefully and strafe run towards it, falling in through the gap in the top. Or, the second method that you can use is the intended method, as John Romero says, where you fire a rocket at the wall to rocket jump or boost to the walled off area. None of this is easy, and none of it is obvious to the regular player, and this is potentially the first time ever in gaming where using the splash damage from a rocket launcher is required to access a secret. Now we have E3M7, which is the gate to Limbo. This was originally supposed to be the first Hell level, which makes sense as to why it's called Limbo in the files. Maybe you started off in Limbo before going to Hell. But now it seems like you just walk past a gate that goes from Hell to Limbo, but you're never actually in Limbo. No matter how you look at it though, this map suffers from the same problems as E3M5, and whether it would have been the first map or the 7th, it would have been just as bad. Teleporters are all over the place. They're so confusing and try to make the player confused and get even more lost. I don't mind maze levels, but I always find teleporters just needlessly confusing, and I hate them in general. It makes the level more difficult and frustrating, which is never a good thing. I'm glad these levels are spread out though, because if we had loads of maps with loads of teleporters back to back, I'd probably have torn my hair out playing through them. Now, to conclude the base game, we have the 8th map of the 3rd episode titled Dis, named after the capital city of Hell from Dante Alighieri's poem The Divine Comedy. Here we have another boss fight, this time against the Spider Mastermind. In Ultraviolence and Nightmare difficulties, there's also a Baron of Hell and 2 Cacodemons, which make the fight more difficult, but not really by much, as the Spider Mastermind can always be killed in one single shot of the BFG from close range, which to me just downright breaks the fight. It makes it way less enjoyable than it could be, because this fight has a lot of potential, but like all of the boss fights in the original Doom, it's underwhelming at best. Before we move on to episode 4 then, we need to talk about the secret map for episode 3, which is actually something I really like. E3M9 is a recreation of E3M1 visually and structurally, which is a really cool twist. And when the game first came out, there's a good chance this level tricked some players into thinking the game had glitched and taken them back to the first map of episode 3 for some reason, right up until the end. When you go to that exit, you're instead confronted with the Cyber Demon, the boss at the end of episode 2. Passing this point activates some changes in the map, as you now need to retrace your steps and go back to the beginning of the level, where a new area has now opened up, which will allow you to complete the map. I love this idea because it's completely unique and creative, and it tricks the player in a pretty cool way, which I appreciate. And that concludes the regular edition of Doom. Those are all 3 of the episodes that were featured in the original game when it released in 1993. But Ultimate Doom is a version of the original Doom that was released later, and it added a 4th episode to the game, and we're going to start discussing it now. So, it's time to move on to episode 4, Thy Flesh Consumed. Episode 4 then kicks off with Hell Beneath, a level designed by the legendary American McGee, who went on to create the Alice series of video games, and his debut level is seen as being one of the hardest maps in the entire Doom series. On ultra-violence difficulty, there are no medkits or stim packs at all on this level, despite the fact that there are 5 Barons of Hell on this level and loads of imps and spectres, and it's very close quarters, which makes dodging those projectiles that much harder. I love the orange sky of this map. It makes the level feel very different from what's come before, despite the fact that we're using very similar textures to what we've seen already. The map layout is very good, which is not a surprise when it's made by American McGee. The environment feels like a real location, with the small intricacies in map details such as how areas connect and the height variations in rooms to give it that sense of believability. One room in this level has more detail than most rooms in episode 2 or 3, whether it be holes in the walls or depressions in the floor. Almost every surface has some kind of detail that makes the level not look bland and uninspired, and that's a sign of quality. Even the enemy placements here just feel well thought out. Each room has different enemy setups. It's taking those same enemies we've seen before and giving them a different, unique spin by having them in different positions or combined with different enemies in different places to make the level feel unique. And whilst this level doesn't have that one thing that makes it stand out from the other levels in this episode, it's still an all-around good map, and it's a great introduction to episode 4. Now we finally get another map made by John Romero with E4M2, Perfect Hatred, an excellent reintroduction for the developer, as this level throws you right into the action the second you start, with imps and sergeants fighting each other straight away. A lot of people criticise this introduction for being too hard because you're facing a lot of enemies in quite a small area, but I honestly love it because it throws you right in at the deep end, and if you've been conserving your ammo in the previous map, you should be alright and you can get through these guys and then replenish your reserves after the main difficult section. The structure of this opening area is also very unique, with a pool of lava down below whilst we're fighting enemies on up high. This degree of verticality is awesome and very unique for a Doom level, and the lava stairs are a pretty cool concept too. This map also has several gaps that you need to run over, which is something Doom hasn't really done much of before, and with the lava underneath you, if you mess it up, it can be costly. Not that messing it up should really happen. This map also has a secret exit leading to the episode 4's secret level, and getting into this one isn't as complicated as the one in episode 3 luckily, but we'll talk more about that level later. The third map then is Sever the Wicked, which is the first level ever created by Sean Green, and sadly it shows. Whilst the map has a lot of fun that can be had with its rocket launcher and plasma cannon craziness, the level just sort of feels like it's all over the place. I like the sort of wooden bars that are across the bridge that's on the sort of lookout building, but other than that the level looks very bland. Most walls have the same texture and the floors look very similar too. The secret doors don't really stand out either, as they tend to on John Romero levels. They usually have a different texture or something that makes them stand out there, but here they don't at all, and generally I'd say this map is just across the board weak. And I don't like saying that about someone's creation, but really there is still fun to be had here unleashing carnage with the plasma cannon and rocket launcher, and that is still good. The fourth map in this episode is called Unruly Evil, and really, this should have been the introductory map of this episode, as this is a very short level where you go through just a few rooms fighting against some imps, cacodemons and sergeants, and that's really all there is to it. This was another map that was designed by American McGee, and I would say it's a bit of a step down from his early map, but that's only because you're through the map before you can really get a good feel for the level. This also means there isn't time to really worry about level design because it's just a few rooms, so there's nothing really that could be connected or could weave back on itself, but for what it is, the level is still good, and it's fun going through these levels with Doom's combat systems, and it's fun kicking ass, but I would say the level is still one of the weaker ones overall in this episode. Now we have the first level designed by Tim Willits, who worked on the level in collaboration with his sister Teresa Chazar. They Will Repent, or E4M5, is an all-around enjoyable experience. It's another example of a level which is just there though really. It's enjoyable because Doom's combat is enjoyable. The map has quite a few elevation changes, there's a few nice things in the environment here and there that spice up some of the rooms, but the green and grey bricks are just everywhere, and the colour scheme starts to get very tiring about halfway through this level. If there was maybe an outside room and another room to break it up, it wouldn't be half as bad, but as it is, this map just sort of exists. It's quite forgettable really overall, but it's not terrible. It could be a hell of a lot worse. Now we have what is in my opinion the best level in episode 4, but it's also potentially the hardest, and it's another John Romero curated experience. Episode 4, Map 6, Against Thee Wickedly. This map is tough, very tough, but also very rewarding to get past those higher difficulties. John Romero clearly designed this level to probably be the hardest map in Doom. It's a very unique layout, but it all connects in some very satisfying ways that make it a joy to navigate. This map is also set against the backdrop of lava, like E4M2, his previous map in this episode, and it involves some light problem solving whilst trying to avoid falling into the lava. But the main issue with this map, which is probably its only issue to me, is the complete lack of armour. There's no armour whatsoever on this map, and that does cause some issues. On Nightmare difficulty, if you get hit by just 3 Cacodemon attacks, you die. If you get hit by 3 Pinkodemon attacks, you die. There is such little room for error when playing through this level on that difficulty, it's insane. I think for me though, the main thing that makes me enjoy this map is the environmental design and how much fun it is to move through the rooms. The different enemy placements and setups are awesome, and it all still feels well thought out and fresh, which is always the case with the John Romero level. Whilst this definitely feels like it's reaching maximum difficulty, it still feels like a fair, curated experience, which is always what I love the most. Now we have the first and only official Doom level created by John W. Anderson, also known as Dr. Sleep, E4M7, and Hell Followed. It's an interesting level as it mixes some of the architecture we've seen throughout episode 4 with that from episode 1, Kneedeep in the Dead, and it also is really easy, which is odd. I feel like if E4M4 was instead the first map of the episode, and then E4M7, this map, was the second map of the episode, the difficulty progression would have made a lot more sense, but instead we have this strange, easy level after arguably the hardest level in the game, and then the boss fight comes after this. It's so odd. You'd expect E4M7 to be even harder than E4M6, but it's so much easier instead. Despite that though, the layout is still really solid here, and whilst the map isn't exactly symmetrical, the layout does have some points of symmetry, just enough to help the map flow into itself really well at some points, which enhance the experience massively. This is a very well designed level structurally, it just doesn't really get the difficulty curve right, and that's a real shame. The final map, Onto the Crawl, is yet another boss fight, this time designed by Sean Green, who makes a return from E4M3, and I do like that it's a slightly different take on the traditional boss fight, featuring lots of regular enemies and a few more traditional rooms before the main boss fight, as well as some keys to actually collect. This level features 11 Barons of Hell, as well as a Spider Mastermind on Ultraviolence and Nightmare difficulties. Now that sounds like a lot of strong enemies, but this level is nowhere near as hard as E4M6 or some of the other levels that came before it. And like all the boss fights in this game, it's actually pretty easy to get through, and I don't really have anything else to say about this level that I haven't said about these enemies before. The secret level of episode 4 is called Fear, and it was designed by Tim Willits, who previously designed E4M5. This is potentially the first Doom level which is entirely symmetrical, a concept which John Romero is not fond of, as he feels it can sometimes be lazy design, but I feel like in this instance the symmetry actually works, because it's just a secret map, so it's relatively small, and the location and design feels like it actually works by being symmetrical. The map isn't that hard, but it can be quite chaotic if you come into it unprepared, but it's a fun level to navigate through and enjoy slaying some demons, and that is the final level in Ultimate Doom. So that's all the levels in all of the versions of Doom that you can buy. However, in 2019, John Romero released Sigil, an episode built to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Doom, with every single map built by him, just like Kneedeep in the Dead, and to me, this is the true conclusion to Doom. It seems only right that the legendary developer and programmer should be the one to create the first and last episode for Doom, and it also balances everything else out quite nicely. Sandy Peterson also led the charge on 2 full episodes, which means Sandy Peterson and John Romero both have equal amounts of levels in the game, and then episode 4 is almost like a guest episode where other people got their chance to make a map or two, with John Romero adding in a couple to make sure there were some strong high quality maps mixed in there as well. Sigil maintains that fantastic level design that John Romero is known for, and the first map is such a fantastic and unique experience. It instantly sold me on the episode. The gimmick of E5M1 Baphomet's demise is that you need to shoot these eyes, and they are switches which activate things like platforms are raised, doors are opened, and this gimmick is used strongly in the short initial map. But it's also still filled to the brim with secrets that aren't immediately noticeable, and the visual design is absolutely top tier. If you haven't played Sigil for yourself, I'd highly recommend going and downloading the WOD online for free and playing it before watching the rest of this section. It's also available for free on the Xbox One and PS4 versions of Classic Doom in the add-on section. The second map, Sheol, perfectly continues that steady difficulty increase from map 1, and also immediately has a nice play with enemy infighting, as you can get the imps that are across from you to kill 2 soldiers that are standing in front of you before they've actually noticed you, which just saves you a bit of ammo. I love the visual aesthetic across all of Sigil, but this map particularly looks really good. The intestines covering the floor gel with the other colours on the floor and the walls, as opposed to that map in episode 2, which looked ugly because of the colours clashing. The red skull that's guarded by the Baron of Hell is also an awesome encounter, and if you access one of the secrets, you can actually find a vantage point which allows you to take him out a bit easier too. I feel like throughout these levels in Sigil, you can see that John Romero has got even better at level design, because some of the levels here, they almost feel a bit like Quake because of the massive changes in verticality and height, and they feel so much more advanced than all of the regular Doom levels we've seen so far, which just makes them a refreshing change of pace after some of the previous levels, which were a little bit more flat, especially in episode 2 and episode 3. The third map then, Cages of the Damned, is another gentle step up from what came before, which I really like, because the difficulty, it does slowly ramp up throughout this entire episode, which is just fantastic design. The maps have clearly been extensively tested to make sure the difficulty progression is just how it should be, and it makes the experience so much better than episode 4. This level is very claustrophobic, probably the most close quarters map in Sigil, and so you'd think it would be one of the hardest, because putting lots of enemies in a claustrophobic space in Doom is usually a recipe for disaster, but this map isn't because it's designed well, and it isn't too claustrophobic. There are regular breaks as well, so the map doesn't get repetitive, where you have to try and take out cacodemons and shotgunners on some narrow walkways. It's putting new spins on that classic Doom formula that makes this episode feel different and unique. We've seen Barons of Hell before, you see, but we've never been faced with a long corridor with the Baron of Hell shooting projectiles at you down. This episode as a whole, it does lots of things like that, new spins on old ideas, and that is what makes it feel fresh. This episode's fourth map takes another step up in difficulty, and it's nice immediately being in a bit more of an open environment after the last map. We just had some tight corridors to finish off the previous map, so here we have a bit more of an open environment. This contrast is one of John Romero's level design principles, and he clearly still follows the same philosophies that he used all those years ago. One thing I like a lot about this level is the frequent use of lava. You're frequently walking on fractured pathways on top of lava. It's a gimmick we haven't seen before in Doom, and this adds a new challenge, even if it is only a little bit of a different spin on previous things. Another thing this level has though is crushing ceilings, and I've previously mentioned I really dislike crushing ceilings, and that's no different here. I still dislike the very idea of crushing ceilings. But here I have to say, they do look cooler. Big blocks with red lights coming down, contrasting that technological texture on the walls that we've seen before. I don't like them, but luckily it's only a short section which breaks up the combat a bit, and it serves its purpose well. After this we have to walk on more narrow passageways above lava in what is possibly one of the most gorgeous looking moments I've seen in Doom. It's old 1993 style textures, but it still somehow looks awesome. I think it's because of the height variations here and the realistic modelling of rock shapes and passageways that gives this environment some credibility and realism. The fifth map of the episode is of a similar difficulty to the fourth map, but it's nothing like it. This map is very big for a Doom level and sprawling, which isn't something you tend to say about a Doom level, but when you walk forward and see some of the environments you'll be exploring here, it's quite daunting. This map once again has that Mount Erebus feel by having several buildings out in a wide open area that you can explore freely. I love this level design style, and I think it's okay to have another map like it in episode 5. You just don't want to do this thing too much, because it's good to have a balance, and that's what we've got here, a perfect balance. This level is visually striking, and to be honest, this entire episode looks really good, which is weird because it's built still using that old 1993 technology, and yet some of these levels and environments look amazing, even if they're built using less detailed textures. It's hard to describe how you progress throughout this level though. Even if I did try and describe it, it'd be hard for you to get your head around it without playing it and having it in your hands, because the way in which you traverse these environments and how they unlock certain things that allow you access to other areas is hard to explain without you walking around these spaces yourself, because this level, honestly, some of the buildings here, they feel like real places. Every building and structure has its purpose, and you maneuver around these environments at first with confusion, but eventually it all clicks, and when you arrive at the exit switch you just feel awesome, having mastered such an intimidating level. But it's just so good. This level is fantastic. It reminds me of John Romero's take on E1M8, which is no bad thing at all. The sixth map of the fifth episode is Unspeakable Persecution, and I'd say this is probably one of the more mediocre levels that we've seen so far. It opens up quite standard really, with a few lost souls and some floors that damage you when you go on them, and afterwards we're greeted with some dark corridors with flashing red lights, and I'm generally not a fan of dark areas in general. I still wasn't in episode 1, because not being able to see kind of takes away some of the enjoyment of the level. I appreciate the level not having those flashing bright lights like in episode 1, but I still find it quite annoying. So it is a better way of executing on that concept, but I still wouldn't say I'm necessarily a fan of it. Later on, we go to a bit more of an entertaining section with the Baron of Hell in a cage shooting at you whilst you need to navigate across bridges in a pretty cool looking set piece, but I can't quite put my finger on it with this level. It just doesn't really do it for me on the whole. I'm not quite sure. It feels like more of concepts we've already seen, just done in slightly different ways, without much of its own identity. I know it does this somewhat unique thing with teleporting between the different bridge sections to find the way to the secret level, but still, it just feels pretty mediocre to me. Now we move on to the seventh map, Nightmare Underworld, which is probably one of the hardest Doom levels ever created, but it disguises it, that's the thing. It doesn't seem hard at first, but towards the end, it really ramps up. I'd argue there are a couple of things in this level that do kind of cross the line into being bullshit, such as the tiny little ledge that you need to tiptoe across because the game's janky physics mean that sometimes the wall will just bounce you off of it to your death. The Cyber Demon as well absolutely crosses into bullshit territory. You can be coming out of a teleporter with basically full health and he just completely obliterates you in seconds. It does cross the threshold to being in unfair territory, especially in those higher difficulty levels, and I do love a challenge when it's fair, but this level I would argue at multiple points crosses the threshold to being unfair. But I'd say the first 2/3 of this level are okay generally and don't have too much bullshit, so overall I'd argue this level is still good. Now we have the boss fight level, Halls of Perdition, and this returns to the difficulty we saw with E5, M4, 5 and 6, where it's challenging but not too bad, and this actually is more of a map than the previous boss fights we've seen, not including John Romero's take on E1, M8. There's quite a few sections to go through with cacodemons and barons of hell, but nothing really we haven't seen before. There's a few jumps here that can be a bit tricky because sometimes the game just won't let you cross the gap for some reason, but other than that, this level is pretty run-of-the-mill. We're pitted against a spider demon as well as a cyber demon for this boss fight, which is a nice twist on enemies we've already gone against, but it's a shame, I'd say, that John Romero didn't create a new enemy to be the final boss, because that would have been a nice bonus of this level, but sadly we didn't get that, and this level is pretty mediocre all around, sort of similar to E5 M6 for me. But we aren't done, because talking of E5 M6, that level is what takes us to E5 M9. Realm of Iblis is the secret map of episode 5, and it's basically a continuation of the difficulty we saw in the 7th map, Nightmare Underworld. So if you go out of map 6, you go straight from 9 to 7, and both levels are brutally difficult, continuing this episode's steady increase in difficulty. Map 9 isn't as hard as map 7, which makes sense because 7 is essentially the grand finale before the boss fight. This map introduces the gimmick of crushers, which are vertical blocks that go up and down and crush you and stick you to them a bit when you make contact with them. This is an interesting take on the vertical crushing ceilings, but I still hate this concept. In many places on this level, it needlessly slows down the pace of the map, and mostly understand that that is the point. You need to slow down and have patience at those moments. I still dislike it because when you have a movement system and combat loop like Doom's, you don't want to slow things down. The jumps you have to make throughout Sigil are already changing things up a bit by introducing mild platforming, but these crushers slow things down, and I feel like when there are already shotgunners and tiny ledges you're balancing on, cacodemons and the like, there's a million projectiles coming at you constantly basically. Also having to watch out for these annoyingly placed crushers just feels like overkill, and it's adding something in that's more of a frustration than anything, and for me it massively harms the replayability of this map. I love some of the other moments though, like the cyber demon who is essentially in a castle and you have to fight enemies on the left and right ramparts. That setup was really cool and is definitely a memorable moment in the level, and something I will return to this level for, but then going through a close quarters tiny little maze filled with shotgunners is something that unfortunately I won't like. This map is overall quite a mixed bag, but I would say in general it's good. Not great, but good. So then that concludes the level by level section of this video, going through episodes 1 through to 5. Now we're going to go and move on to something that the game influenced in the entire gaming industry. One of the things that is incredibly popular nowadays, and something that I would say Doom was almost a catalyst for, and that is speedrunning. Speedrunning in games wasn't really that common in 1993, and it's surprising to me that the developers at id Software wanted players to actually speedrun their game, because each Doom level is so expansive with so many hidden secrets and so much exploration that can be done, but at the end of every single level there was always that little word at the bottom, par, and next to it is a number, and usually that number is really low. That is the par time for that level, the time it took a developer at id Software to get through that map whilst they were trying to be as quick as they could. And that right there is all it took, and suddenly the Doom speedrunning community was born. Doom is one of the most popular games for people to speedrun, and really, it always has been. But it's had a resurgence in more recent years thanks to, obviously, the internet now being so widely accessible, as well as YouTubers like Carl Jobs, who are challenging people to try and get lower and lower times and offering people rewards for it. And sometimes that's all people need, a little incentive, no matter how small, and they will go crazy. And looking at some of the Doom speedruns, yeah, people definitely go crazy. The amount of insane things that can be done in Doom is just nuts, and the amount of speedrun categories is also insane, but here are the most popular ones. We have UV Speed, which is finishing a level as fast as possible on Ultra Violence difficulty. UV Max is finishing a level as fast as possible on Ultra Violence, whilst also killing every single monster at least once, except Lost Souls, and with 100% sequence. NM Speed is finishing a level as fast as possible on Nightmare. NM100S is finishing a level as fast as possible in Nightmare with 100% secrets. UV Fast is finishing a level as fast as possible in Ultra Violence with the fast parameter, killing every monster at least once except Lost Souls and with 100% secrets. UV Respawn is finishing a level as fast as possible in Ultra Violence with the respawn parameter with at least 100% kills and with 100% secrets. UV Pacifist is finishing a level as fast as possible in Ultra Violence with the following restrictions. You're not allowed to harm monsters directly, so no shooting, chainsawing or punching monsters, and not harming monsters indirectly. No destroying barrels that hurt monsters, no activating crushers that hurt monsters, but you can cause monsters to attack each other because these are unintentional telefrags. UV Tyson is finishing a level as fast as possible in Ultra Violence whilst killing every monster at least once except Lost Souls without using any weapons other than the fist or the berserk fist or the chainsaw or the pistol. MMH is finishing a level in Ultra Violence with the highest maximum minimum health possible. So that means you need to try and keep your health as high as possible at all times. Now some of these categories are particularly crazy, like the Nightmare ones to me, as well as Pacifist. Nightmare difficulty in Doom is really difficult because enemies respawn, which means that paths you clear often get blocked again by the same enemy, and when you take so much damage, this becomes an absolute nuisance, and a lot of the time, luck is the main thing that will help you, because enemies respawn at random times, which is the main annoyance. Pacifist runs are also crazy to me because the thought of clearing a Doom level without ever hitting an enemy is such a weird thing to think about, and yet it's a popular way of people trying to clear the game. Speedrunning though has never really been my thing, but it's impossible to do a comprehensive analysis of Doom without mentioning the massive impact that it has had on speedrunning, because it's such an important part of the game's legacy and its effect in the industry as a whole. So then, in this video we've discussed all 27 levels in the original Doom. We've discussed the 9 levels added for Ultimate Doom's 4th episode, Thy Flesh Consumed, and the 9-level 5th episode that was created by John Romero to celebrate Doom's 25th anniversary, as well as the 2 alternate episode 1 maps that were created by John Romero in 2016. So that is 47 maps we've talked about in this video. That's pretty crazy, but the thing is, I can remember all 47 of them well, and that's because across the board this is a good collection of maps. There may be a couple of levels here and there that fall below the regular standard, but I wouldn't say there's a single map here that's actually bad. There isn't a single map I ever dread when I'm playing this game, and that's because every single one of the developers and programmers that worked on Doom are talented. Even the one-off level designers in episode 4, they all brought something to this game that's worth experiencing. Yes, I personally prefer John Romero's level design, but that's because he offers an experience that personally suits my tastes better than others. But that doesn't mean Sandy Peterson, Tom Hall, American McGee, Sean Green, Tim Willits, Teresa Jazar, Dr. Sleep, and even David Calvin didn't create maps that offer a unique, enjoyable experience, because they absolutely did. The original 1993 Doom is a legendary game, powered by an incredible engine developed by John Carmack, utilizing graphics created by Adrian Carmack, Kevin Cloud, and Gregor Punchatz, containing levels developed by John Romero, Tom Hall, and Sandy Peterson, whilst music by Bobby Prince makes you feel awesome in the background. Doom is one of the most influential games ever to grace the video game industry. The market left is visible in everything today. The entire first-person shooter genre owes its popularity to Doom. There is a reason why everyone in the 90s had a copy of Doom. There's a reason why everyone couldn't stop talking about it. At one point, more computers had a copy of Doom than a copy of Windows, and that is saying something. The franchise didn't die though, that's the thing. Doom isn't just an old relic from the 90s. The game has a thriving player base that is still active to this day, and the series is still massively popular. Doom 2, Doom 3, Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal all sold massive amounts of copies, and they are all seen as being fantastic video games. Even if some people might prefer one over the other, all games were released to critical acclaim. The franchise is a juggernaut beloved by millions, and as long as the games keep coming out at that same quality, I'm sure it always will be, because frankly, there is no better way to pass the time than by slaying demons whilst being knee-deep in the dead. So, thank you for watching this video. If you've made it this far, that's the end of my script. I'm rambling now, but I really hope you enjoyed this lengthy video. It took a long time to make and try and get all the research correct like I did. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. And if you really enjoyed it, then please feel free to become a channel member. It helps make this more than just a hobby and allows me to actually take the time and justify putting the amount of time into a video like that as I did, and it'll help motivate me to make more videos on that kind of quality. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Maybe you share this video with anyone you think might enjoy it if it was good enough. Thank you again for watching. This is Soul Reborn signing out. Have a good one.